Maggie Murphy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So, you've just been explaining how you are, well, we're currently tucked away in a bit of a storm at the moment. We're both in the same county. So, even though we're online, we're still in the same county. And you're tucked away in your little porter cabin in Lewes Football Club. I want to get onto how you got into Lewes Football Club and your journey, but really, I do want to start at your own personal sporting journey, what that looked like. So just give some context for the people listening and start wherever you want to start there.
Yeah, okay. I grew up on the Isle of Wight, although both my parents are from Scotland. So it's a brilliant place to grow up. I think the fact it's an island means that there's lots of things that happen that are kind of confined. So there's lots of opportunities to be the best in your county because it's very, very specific and very, defined. So I used to play any sport that was going. PE was my favorite lesson at school, and I played whatever I was allowed to play. I guess in general that was netball or badminton. Later on, we were allowed to play hockey. I loved it, and I play at county level. But once a year, the school would allow us to enter into a girls' football tournament. And I just remember the first time we were allowed to play in this tournament, I was like, this is it. I like this. With netball, I always felt like it was too restrained, too many rules. You're not allowed to touch anyone. With hockey, I loved it, but I wanted to get even more stuck in. And, for me, football and sliding tackles and dirt. And yeah, for me, it was just something really, really special. And I loved it. And I just wish that the school would put us into more. I didn't want it to be something that was just once a year. So that's kind of how it started. There were no girls' football clubs on the Isle of Wight at the time. And I remember going to high school and a teacher who I'll always be grateful to, she started this girls' football club at lunchtime on a Monday. It's half an hour or something. And I remember moaning to her about the fact there was no girls' clubs and, why didn't the school have a team and why was it just this Monday session? And she kind of spun it around for me a little bit and said, well, there is a women's football team. Why don't you go and join them? And I think it was the first time that rather than having doors slammed in your face, it was the first time that someone opened a door and said, well, go on then, go on. So sure enough, I went along. At the time I was thinking, I'm just a kid, I'm 13 years old, why would I go to this women's football team? But yeah, I went along and absolutely loved it and played and ended up playing for this women's team aged 13, 14. In fact, my first ever game for the Isle of Wight, I was playing illegally under somebody else's name because I wasn't old enough to play adult football. And that very first game was against Lewes at the Dripping Pan where I now work.
No
Which
way.
is kind of crazy. Yeah, and that was like
How was that?
1997. Yeah, 97.
Wow.
So I remember the club way back before it had a main stand, way back before we've had a lot of stuff has happened at the club since then. But there's definitely a little bit of serendipity that obviously fast forward, well, more than 20 years. It was definitely something that sparked a little memory for me when I ended up coming here.
So when you were saying you wanted to get stuck in, what did sport offer you as an experience, just for yourself personally?
Do you know, I think that I was always an academic kid. Like I always got good grades, but there was just something special about sport. I just loved running around, I was climbing trees. I was probably like a bit of a tomboy, I just loved being physically active. Like, one time my older brother bought a computer. It was like a Sega Mega Drive. This is back in, I guess, the 90s, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
please.
I'm one of five kids. And all of us had to put in, I remember this, £20 to buy this Sega Mega Drive. So I was a dutiful sister. I put in my £20. And then I played it once and I was like, this just isn't, I hate this thing. And I asked my brothers and sisters to buy me out of it again, because I just was never going to touch it, because I just wanted to be outside running around, or I wanted to be reading books. Those were my two things. I think it was just an outlet for me. And I think one of the things that I wish was a little bit different, I have no regrets at all, but one of the things that I do wish was a little bit different was the fact that when I was growing up, it felt like you were either academic or sporty, but you could not be both. And so when opportunities started to pop up for me, I was offered a scholarship in the US to go play. And I was like, oh, no, you don't understand. I get good grades. I'm going to go to university. I'm going to do my A-levels. And so I wish that wasn't the case. And I think that now today it's not as much of the case, although I do think it is a bit of the case for great female athletes to footballers today. I think it's quite difficult to actually have a really strong academic background, and still maybe easier for women than it is for men because you can get a scholarship to go to the US. But in this country, I think there's still a strange value piece around being an athlete and being an academic person.
Yeah.
I think in the US they've figured it out a little bit better, but here we're still struggling.
I think 100%. I mean, there's real controversy, isn't there, in the US though, around college athletes being sort of not held to ransom, but I remember watching a documentary around how they essentially are given their scholarships, and they're used for their images, their image rights now. Like there are some athletes out there that I think I saw like an athlete pop up on Instagram, and the likes and the amount of engagement in this account, I was like, oh, this guy must be in the NFL. And I looked at it and was like, no, he's in a college camp. He's like got 2 million followers. And you're like, this is wild. And I mean, it was all the controversy was around they can't earn any money out of it. They can't actually monetize it. They're not even getting paid to play. Like they're just free. And it's the fact that they get a scholarship, they get an academic piece of paper at the end, but then it's kind of all masked in what is their academics they're doing. Having spoken to some schools over here as well, I know for a fact a couple of colleges locally had changed their administrative sort of their requirements for you to get in, because they were saying that you needed to get certain marks. These are private schools. These were private schools that we were talking to, and they were asking for certain academic levels before that. And they used to offer scholarships. They used to offer that opportunity to be a scholarship athlete and have your academics as well. It's a really tough landscape. But having been a pro, right, I always count myself fortunate. I went to a state school that my parents were pretty forward thinking. Like they knew sport was, I wanted to do it, but sport was a finite landscape for you to be in, a finite career. And so I had to go home and study and make sure my grades were good. And there was ways in which I compartmentalized what I did. And I think there is value in that. There's value in both, right? There's value in just the dedication and the commitment. And I think even if you're just an academic, and the skills and the attributes you can gain from just being in sport, from hard work, persistence, failure, overcoming that adversity, they're transferable into academics. And at the same time, there's enough value in academics to transfer into sport. You may see the game differently. You may be able to understand it better. You might take an interest in the biomechanics, the biology, the tactical side, whatever it might be. And at coaching level, there's so much that crosses over. It is a bit of a wild landscape though.
Yeah, and I think that also, apart from like your academics and then the sport, I think your social side, one thing that I remember, which was very different for me growing up, was if myself and my friends all agreed to go to the cinema and it started chucking it down with rain, I would be there. And some of my friends would just be like, oh, should we go another time? Or should we? But it never occurred to me to not show up, because I'd be training in the rain or the wind or the snow and if I was not there, I was going to let my teammates down. And I remember this really, really strongly, that those things around commitment and dedication and showing up and being there for others, because it's not just about yourself, I think they also filter into your personal life as well as your academic side and your sports side as well.
Yeah, there's especially team sports. You were talking about playing hockey and football, and also interesting that you said that you wanted to get more stuck in having played hockey. Hockey are mad people, like they're madmen and women. Like it's an insane sport. Like I played cricket, right, and it's a hardball sport. And I looked at hockey players at the way in which they're hitting the ball at each other. I'm going, no, thank you.
Yeah,
no, I've just not got an interest in that. But your career then developed into human rights and anti-corruption. So talk about how that came about. What the sort of what the ignition into that was.
So it's still a bit of a windy road, because I think, as I said, knew that I was good at school, so I ended up taking a year out before going to Oxford University. And in my year out, I spent time out in Tanzania, which was a country that I'd picked. I now feel a bit stupid about it, but at the time I picked it because I'd never heard of the country, and I just thought, how can there be an entire country that I've never heard of? So I was, very lucky to spend time out there, and I played football out there for a Tanzanian club, and we won the national cup, things like that. So I had this incredible experience of playing football in this completely different environment. Then came back to Oxford University, where I, played for the team there, captained the team, and kind of did the academic side. And then I studied languages. So my third year abroad, all my friends were going to France, and I was like, you know, I can go to France anytime. So I split my time between Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, where I played football, and also Senegal, where I played football still. So I was always using my academic side and the opportunities I was being given, but trying to see the world. I was curious about the world. And everywhere where I went, I was able to find a team to play for. Right after university, I went to Rwanda, was living there for a year, you know, still playing football. And football is the most incredible access, the most incredible door into a culture or a world that you don't know. You don't need to know the language in order to fit right in, but very quickly you can pick up on signals, and you have an automatic friendship group. There's an automatic way for you to enter into a world that you don't know, you don't understand, but you can get a little bit closer to, because you've got this common shared interest. And being out in these countries and playing football there, all the kind of challenges that I'd put up with, which honestly amounted to being given really terrible referees, really terrible pitches, hand-me-down kit that didn't fit, having to travel further, having to pay more. It kind of, even though there was so many things that were challenges, they kind of pale in comparison a little bit to how strong these women had to be to play football in these countries and go against particular social norms or whatever else it might be that they were facing. So it gave me a bit of an insight into the world and fairness. And every time I was away, I was always working on some kind of social or community project, whether it was in health or whether it was education. And as over the years, I kind of started to hone my way into understanding the world and how it's governed. And this is where my interest in human rights and corruption bubbled up. Like for me, my core value is fairness. I cannot get past something which doesn't feel fair. Probably way back in the garden when I was playing football with my brothers and they were allowed to play and I was the one that was hauled in to, like, I don't know, lay the table for dinner. You know, there was that something that was triggering there. Something that was then triggered later when I was playing football in these different countries, and then later on feeding that through into the way that the world was operating, was holding some people back, and you know, some people were being accelerated. So I think the corruption world was fascinating. It was about governance, it's about politics, about power, and who has power and who abuses power. And so yeah, I spent a good 6 years or so working for one of the world's largest anti-corruption organizations, Transparency International. And my role was to kind of work with different groups around the world and represent them in international forums, whether it was the UN or the G20 or the OECD. And I think it was, again, I think that I was like this bridge, like football was a bridge for me into different communities where I could be myself, but there's like a Venn diagram of yourself overlapping with another culture. And I feel like that helped me work with communities to try to help represent them or provide a platform for them to come to the UN, which was not their world. They didn't understand how the UN worked. So I was able to kind of try to provide that platform for them, and all in a spirit of fairness, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think the real transition into the football world came several years later, when I actually stopped playing competitively, and I was reflecting back on why it was so difficult and why there were so many challenges that were put in women's way to play, because I'd never really thought about women's issues or gender equality. It was just never on my mind. All I wanted was just to play football. But the FIFA corruption scandal was really instrumental for me. It was a clash of everything I cared about and all the injustices, corruption, lack of fairness. You had Sepp Blatter, who said that women should wear shorter shorts and tighter tops if they wanted to create commercial value, things like that. And I think for me, there was a little bit of enough is enough. And I had enough backing, enough understanding of the world of governance to understand that there was a real proper governance issue with football. And the reason that I'd been held back so much, and the reason that other women were being held back, was that the people that were in charge of governing the game at the highest level just didn't care about women's football. And that was filtering all the way through down into the national associations, all the way down into the county associations, so that when I, as a teenager, was stopped from playing in a tournament by our county association because they didn't want the women's team to fundraise for themselves to go to a tournament because they weren't prepared to pay for the men to go. Like, that decision might feel local, but it starts at the top and there's a trickle down. And so I think there was a little bit of me that was like, if not you, then who? You have this background, you have this understanding, this experience. You got to figure out if it's possible to make football better, do it better. Sorry, that was long.
No,
there's a fair bit to unpack there, but like the first bit really is around the most inspiring part for me is around how you've managed to find this core value, which is really strong. It's in fairness, right? But how it came from sort of earlier memories of, or maybe you've started to piece together those memories. And that's something that I do with athletes, businesses and students now. It's like, essentially, what are your values? And your values are sort of held together by these little moments that of like achievement, moments where you've been proud, and also moments where you've had to get through really tough periods and fight through those. And what energy did you draw upon, or what was the thinking behind it? So for you, it was fairness. But then also quite interesting that you said you didn't recognize what was going on in the systems whilst you were doing it. So what was your mindset when you were in sport?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion, to be honest. I mean, I just wanted to play football, and honestly, Lewis, if I had just been allowed to play at the level that I wanted to play at, I would never be the CEO of a football club today. I'd have cracked on and done something else. But it was just that there were so many of these little things that would pop up where I was like, hang on a sec, but my brothers don't have to do that. Or hang on a sec, why are you telling me that I'm good for a girl when I'm better than you? Like, can't you just say I'm good? And it's like, it's these little bubbles that pop up from time to time that you can't string them all together. Because I think what people don't always understand is that the kind of discrimination or the challenges, they're small, they can be really small. It's not like one day you walk into work and someone says, you're a woman, you're rubbish, you're sacked, we hate you. It's not like that. It's like little bubbles of things that at some point, something's going to trigger you to reflect back and tie all those bubbles together and go, hang on a sec, there's a system here. And that's the systemic challenge that we face. It's not that you walk into a football ground and someone gives you a bit of a glance and wishes that you weren't there. That's not it. It might make you feel a bit ick, or it might make you feel like I'm going to go and stand somewhere else. It's not that. It's all of it. It's all of it together. So I think but it takes time and distance. It took me stopping playing to kind of look back and go, oh, there was something there that I wasn't recognizing, because the whole time I was just trying to play. So when you're in it, you're just trying to make the team. You're trying to then stay in the team. You're trying to come back from an injury. You're trying to impress the coach. In my case, because I never played at the top level, it was, oh, our coach has just quit. Now you have to coach the team for a few months until you can figure out if there's any money to get someone else in. But until then, you've got to figure out all the admin for these. It's like you're just trying to get by. And that's why I always think that I've come to things like gender equality really late. Like, I was definitely someone that said, I'm not a feminist, which makes me feel really awkward now, because of course I'm a feminist, and I now expect everyone I kind of expect everyone to be a feminist, right? But it was definitely something that I didn't feel comfortable with, because I was like, oh no, it's not that. I'm not a feminist. I just want to be able to play football and for people to get out of my way and let me do this thing. And so I think there's lots of interesting things there that you can only look back on later.
Yeah, I mean, now the conversation is so much so that players, because one of the things you're trying to do when you're an athlete, when you're trying to literally achieve your own dreams, is that you're trying to actually zone out so much that you focus on the task at hand, which is as basic as it is. It's like, what am I doing in training? What am I doing in this game coming up? And ultimately, you're trying to simplify it. And there's kind of from what you're describing, there's kind of this nice part about it, which is this almost oblivious nature to the external factors that are going on, so that you can focus on the thing that you want to, which is the sport. But the problem is those external factors are actually constraining the sport that you're in and your journey, your path in front of you. I never really would have experienced that, because I wouldn't have had it. Like there was always a clear path ahead. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing constraining that environment. So it's really interesting now, the landscape they're in. If we sort of like fast forward to today, where you do have athletes that are so aware of what's going on because of people like yourself, right? That are out there talking about it, that have done, and we'll get on to everything around Lewes and the world that we now live in, and people, the awareness around it. But at the same time, you look at it as from an athlete's point of view, like my task, my goal is to do this. And the more distractions you can have, that can be really disorientating sometimes. So yeah, I don't know really where I was going with that, but it's just such an interesting insight that you had sort of this close, very singular-minded approach, and then suddenly started seeing the peripheries around you and going, oh, okay, wow, there's actually something going on here.
Yeah, and I think where that connects in now is how I think about the players at Lewes, and half the time I'm trying to like protect them from anything, like so that they can focus on the game, and then part of me is like, no, we need to open it up so that they understand some of the challenges, or they might be able to understand why it is that our changing rooms are not as glossy as somebody else's in the TikTok video because of all these other different factors that are at play. But a few weeks ago, I was talking to the players. We had this big game, FA Cup quarter-final for the first time ever against Manchester United. And we've been calling for equal FA Cup prize money for about 4 years at the club. And so I was like, right, well, with this big game, we need to get back out our campaigning, because we have been successful. We've managed to increase the FA Cup prize money about 7-fold for women in this country, but it's still not enough. It's still a tiny amount. And so I was thinking, like, what are we going to do? And I said to the captain, hey, it'd be good to catch up sometime to chat through what the club might want to do. And she said, no, the players want to do this. We want to do this. And it was just amazing, like, to think that actually the players were saying, no, we want to take this on now. It's not for you. You don't have to do this. We want to be the ones that are calling for equal FA Cup prize money. We want to take this on. We want to develop a campaign. And I was like, this is, I get goosebumps actually thinking about it now, because it's powerful when it comes from players. I don't want the club to look preachy as well. And I feel like we always run the risk of being that moral high ground club that just like nags about things. But here you've got these players that are standing up and going, no, through the things that we have learned by being at Lewes, we now want to take this on, and we want to challenge this, and we want to take this forward. And I think that's where I don't think that them having those conversations impacted on the day of the game. I don't think it impacted on their performance. In fact, I think it probably brought them together. It creates a more rounded athlete. But there is a balance in trying to, I feel like there's a lot where you're trying to protect players a lot of the time. And then you're like, hang on, let something else in now. You have to let them into, I think maybe one of the challenges, and this is maybe for you as a pro athlete, to what extent are people's personalities dimmed if we don't allow them to have those big conversations? And I feel like my players are super smart, intelligent women and men, by the way, because our men's team have now started also doing their own campaigning on different issues as well. And I think sometimes we underestimate young people, and we underestimate men a lot. And I think that in trying to protect players, we're actually doing them a disservice if they're not allowed to be their whole selves. And a lot of them might not want to take part in a campaign. It's not their thing. But for others, this is actually going to enrich them. And I think we have to be open to the idea that, players are multifaceted, and I would have hated it if I had been stifled, in having an opinion when I was playing. But I guess it needs to be managed in a way as well.
When you're an athlete, I think it's a part of you need to be aware of, that you want to bring it out at the right time. There's you literally have these different personas, so you're bringing as much as your own person. It's actually a more challenging blend when you start thinking about it, because you think about bringing your own personality into your sport. But one thing that I did was I tried to create a persona when I was playing sport. So I tried to create this other character that I was. And at the same time, when you're out on the field and you're trying to perform, you do want to be you want all of your energy going towards the task of achieving your best performance as an individual. So hopefully you impact the team in a positive way. And I think if you I remember there being moments where I allowed external noise to come in and affect that on-pitch performance. So this is purely from a performance point of view. This has nothing to do with my personality or the person I am, my character. So I think it's just compartmentalizing it in a really effective way. So knowing when you want to speak about these issues and speak about anything that you have real passion about, right? It's bring it out at the right time. And that's just a skill set that you have to have as an athlete, especially at the high level, because there's just more noise. There's just far more things to think about. There's pressures that just get ramped up. There's media that could get involved. There's social media now that you've got to manage. but at the same time, it brings opportunity. It does bring opportunity, and it also can then, from a professional athlete's point of view, or anyone who's semi-professional, or even just amateur, when your time ends, what has the sport allowed you to have a passion for after the sport? Is there something you want to take with you outside of the sport and continuously work on and develop and maybe even start to bring up social change and start talking about issues, and you can be a driving force? Maybe you've got a platform now that you can use, all these different things. For people that, we've been speaking about it a little bit, but for people that may not know anything about Lewes Football Club, give them a bit of insight as to who it is and what makes it so special.
Yeah, so Lewes is a special club. I mean, it's been around since 1885, so it's actually one of the oldest clubs in the country. And obviously, for the majority of that history, it was a men's club only. I think there's two really big milestones in the club's history. One was actually on the back of the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. It nearly went bust. So it nearly went into administration. But what happened instead was 6 fans came together and decided to take the club into fan ownership. And so that has then sparked a very democratically organized club, which is, very much for the fans. And so at the beginning, there was just 6 people, and then it was 60, and then it was 600. Today, we have 2,400 owners in 41 countries. And so,
Wow.
originally it was just people in Lewes. And then the more the fan-based element of the club kind of started to shine through, whether it was in the fact that the marketing is a little bit quirky, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, there's lots of pop. It doesn't look like, the football posters up around town look like art pieces. They're not actually football pieces. A lot of people wouldn't even know it was a football game going on. So it's like lots of little touches like that. An April Fool's Day joke, which was, announcing that our new directors' corporate boxes would be beach huts, ended up being so popular that it just happened. So we now have 4 beach huts that you can rent on a match day. So it's like little touches like that is just, it's got a personality. And then bit by bit, the club realized that it was a community-owned club, but was only really serving half of the community properly. And so the other big milestone was in 2017, when it took the decision, basically a couple of board members stood for election. So you have to be an owner to stand for election, and only owners can vote in the election. And so 2 of them stood on a platform saying, 2 men stood on a platform saying they would introduce equality into the club if they were elected, and they were elected. So as a result of that, the playing budgets were equalized. Decisions are now, lots of people get really hung up on pay, but a lot of this is about equal treatment and equal value. So both teams play at the main ground. So it's the home of both teams. We both have access to training facilities. It's the conversations and the decisions about who trains when and what and on what. It's all done with an equal mindset rather than prioritizing one team over another. And so that was, equal marketing budgets meant that the women's team, which didn't make any money, actually quadrupled their attendance within 2 seasons, even though the ticket price was increased by 160%. So it's little touches like that, which showed that when you invest in women, you get a return. And now both teams get roughly the same attendance. Sponsorship is, flown through the roof compared to where it was just 5 years ago. And the women bring in a TV broadcast deal. It's like there's lots of elements. And I think for me, the special thing is that we now have a club with 2 teams that generate money, 2 teams that are loved, 2 teams that generate energy and passion and fans. And it's just a really special club which is trying to do the right things. And so that decision fuses into everything. So we don't take gambling money, for example, because we don't think it's the right thing for a community club to profit off gambling, especially when there's such an issue with child gamblers at the moment in this country, a growing challenge. So that's the kind of backstory of the club and why it's so special. And the women's team, from having been invested in properly, is now in the 2nd tier. So we're in the top 20 teams in the country. Little Lewes, that people don't always know how to pronounce, and yet are playing against Crystal Palace or Liverpool, Manchester United a few weeks ago. So it's a special place, but it's fragile as well. Like we can't pretend everything is not rosy, even though everything has grown so much. We're still so fragile because we're always living hand to mouth when it comes to sponsorship or partnerships and things. So, and as more money comes into women's football, but a lot of that money is just being slid across the table from the men's side of the club rather than being generated or earned. It's harder for us to keep up. So if a big club decides to be more interested in a women's team and gives £500,000 or £1 million, I have to make 500,000. I have to generate £1 million somehow through building a sustainable club environment rather than just waiting on a handout. And that's the challenge. And I don't begrudge the money going into the women's teams. It just shows that we're building something, but it's going to be hard to build fast enough to keep up with just the big clubs that are kind of sliding the zeros across the spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's obviously, most people will see the Premier League sides that will have your Man Uniteds, your Man Cities, Arsenal's, Tottenham, Brighton, that have all got these women's sides that, like you said, it must be so much easier. For you getting involved, so when did you start getting involved? And it looks very aligned with just everything you've spoken about, your own personal values. And so what really sung to you about the role that you're now in?
Yeah, okay, so there's a story in this as well. Sorry, Lewis. So
this is what this is for.
I was living in Berlin at the time of FIFA corruption scandal, and I was working in this anti-corruption organization that was, and I was just able to understand what had happened by way of money laundering and these bribes that are being paid. And I was pretty angry, but by that time I had quite an international network of friends who I'd played with. I'd lived overseas, and by a complete chance connection, I was introduced to a woman called Laura Youngson, who runs an incredible football boot company called Ida Sports. Now, she didn't at the time. And she too, in her own pocket of the world, she was living in Australia, I think at the time, was also furious. She was furious, I was angry, and collectively we had this network of people, and we wanted to do something that no one had ever done before, that couldn't be challenged, that was something special and unique, that no one could class as like the B version of sport, in the way that women's football is sometimes categorized after all the rest of men's sport. So we got together a group of about 30 women from 20 different countries. And those women were elite players who played for the USA, who played for England, France, and they're also grassroots players, including from Saudi Arabia, from Nepal, from the UK. And we set off on a hike, and we took 6 days to climb in the rock and the ice to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. And when we got to the top of Kili, there's this volcanic, it's the volcanic crater, and it's just full of ash, really hard to walk on. And we laid a full-size football pitch in this crater.
Wow.
And played a full 90-minute match at the top of Kilimanjaro. And we had to have FIFA official referees who were all women as well. And the game was terrible. It was absolutely, you could hardly breathe up there anyway. And then, volcanic ash was worse than kind of playing football on a beach. 90 minutes of it. At the end of the game, though, it was 0-0. That's how bad it was. But 90 minutes, the whistle went, and both teams celebrated because we just set a Guinness World Record for the highest altitude football match by about 2.5 miles higher in altitude than the pre-existing record. Wow. So, and that record still stands today. And I think that was something really special. We thought it was the thing, but it ended up being the start of things. So we've set another 4 Guinness World Records, I think, since then, different football world records. And it was powerful because we're still very, very connected. We still are building each other up and working with each other and supporting each other. But an interesting thing was, it fired me up. I realized that I wasn't alone, because I felt like in a lot of football teams, I was the one that was questioning the decisions of the county FA or the club, or I would be the one that'd be like, why are we doing it like this? And it just felt like I was the only one that was up for a fight, that was getting this anger. And then I realized I wasn't alone, because there was all these other women around the world that were doing exactly the same things by themselves in all these other pockets of the world. And when I came back down from the mountain, it was about a month or two later that I saw Lewes FC announce this decision to introduce pay equity. And I became an owner. It's a fan-owned club. So I clicked 3 times, but I was like, I knew about the club because I played against them in 1997. But I couldn't have even put it on a map at the time. But I just wanted Lewes FC to know that me, Maggie Murphy, living in Berlin at the time, I wanted the club to know that I backed them. So I became an owner and thought, I'll never go there. I don't even really care about the results or anything like that. I just want the club to know that I backed them. ironic in the end. But yeah, and I think my path started crossing a little bit because with Equal Playing Field, which was the charity now that I help run after this, the Guinness World Records, we still work together on that. I think our path would cross Lewes FC, and Equal Playing Field, and eventually one of the directors just gave me a call and said, hey, would you be interested in coming on board at the club as the general manager of the women's side of the club? And I kind of just laughed because I was like, no, you don't understand. I'm academic. I've got this other career. I work in anti-corruption and human rights, and this is my world. I just talk about football on the outside. Like, football's not. I still had this thing from being a teenager where I was like, oh no, sport is like not academic. Sport's over here. And then I get the whole feeling of, if not you, then who? And put your money where your mouth is. Like, you think that you can do better. You think that you can run a club which is better than the ones that you've experienced through your life. So it was a bit of a challenge. And yeah, I decided to say yes. So for the first 2 seasons, I was the general manager of the women's side. And then the last 2 seasons, I've taken on this CEO role, so overseeing the men's side and running the whole business. So yeah, it was like a bit of a strange, I hadn't worked in football before. I hadn't worked in sport. That wasn't what I intended to do. So yeah, it was a bit of a shift.
You'd sent me a message before we did this about anger being a motivating factor. Is that sort of anger from the issues that you'd faced growing up and what you see in the world now? And then I guess sort of leading on to your role now and maybe looking into what you're trying to achieve. What are the motivating factors that you have, and maybe some of the things that you're looking to try and achieve with the club and maybe further afield?
Yeah, I think for me, anger is really powerful if you can channel it. I think anger when you can't channel it, or anger when you don't channel it, you can just blow yourself up in a spitting ball of fury, right? But if you're able to harness your anger, then I think it can be really powerful. And in fact, I don't think that we're going to change the world in any capacity unless we're angry about it. Like, the people that are really angry about climate change are the ones that are going to move the dial. So the people that are really angry about the flaws in our immigration system, whatever it might be, I think you have to be angry about something. And I think for me, I'd worked for so long in lots of different social justice areas, but the football one made me really angry because it felt personal. And I think maybe that's a connection as well. So I think being able to harness that and realize that anger is actually a positive thing. Like, anger is not a bad thing. It means you care. It means that you see a flaw. It's like, I always think that if you're angry about the way your country is being run, it's because you're patriotic, not because you're not patriotic. And if you're angry about the way that football's being run, it's because you love it and you want it to be better and you think it can be better, and you're willing to put yourself through a lot in order to try to get it there. So yeah, I think number one is that anger is a really positive characteristic. And if you're not angry about something, how?
Yeah, like you said, you're not maybe passionate for it and it doesn't mean anything. How do you balance, you've had doors shut in your face, both in your own journey, and I'm sure you're getting doors in what you're doing now shut. How do you balance the emotional side of it and then actually being able to deal with that sort of setback and move on?
I think I probably haven't quite processed this because I'm still in the thick of it. So it's probably the kind of thing that in 10 years I'll look back and go, God, how did you manage to keep going? I think I naturally have quite thick skin and I'm quite resilient. I definitely have a high tolerance level. And I think that maybe some of that is growing up. I had the most idyllic of childhoods, but I also grew up in a household where I did have these 3 brothers, and I could see that, they were allowed to do things that I wasn't always allowed to do. And I'm talking really basic things, like they were allowed to go and watch Jurassic Park in the cinema, but I wasn't allowed to go, that kind of thing. It was too scary for me, but I was like, what? So I think that I've always kind of seen how things work, but I think when you see how things work, it also means that you can communicate. I've never had any fear of going up to a guy that I thought wasn't treating someone fairly and saying, hey, I think, this isn't quite right. Because I've had these brothers and my dad are very influential in my life. I've never been told I've been told I couldn't do stuff, but it was always I would always be the one that would go home and write out a list of all the reasons why I should be able to do it and have a negotiation.
Really? Right. Yeah. Okay.
I could go and watch Jurassic Park or not. So yeah, I think I just have thick skin naturally. I haven't really thought about the resilience piece. I think the one key thing for me is, obviously you can probably hear I'm very values driven. And so the times in my life when I've had a job which have not aligned with my values, I have found it hard to carry on going, to fight and to get through, because I really sense when my values are distant from what I'm doing, that's when I get really challenged. But if I'm like, Lewes FC is obviously so aligned to my values that I want to do everything for it to succeed, to the point of, if it meant that someone else should have my job rather than me, I would want that to happen, because I think that it's the most important thing for the club to thrive and survive. So yeah, I think the values piece is something you can only really learn when you're older as well, when you have those moments to go back and say, hey, I was proud of that. As you said, I was proud of that, I achieved that, and this made me feel that, and the common thread through all of that was fairness or another value.
I found that really interesting that you journaled you wrote down the reasons why something you should have been allowed to go watch Jurassic Park, for example. I actually gave that advice to someone recently who was talking about their anger and frustration over an issue, and I think it was just a relationship. It was just they'd met someone who didn't think the way they thought. And do you know what? I see this on many different, whether it's a news channel, social media, around people who are standing up for a cause and they are emotionally charged by it, and they get frustrated in the non-acceptance of where other people are at with it. They almost, like, you see them just tearing themselves apart in the fact that I'm trying to put my point across on whatever issue it is, and there's always two sides, right? I always think of, right now in sport, there's the transgender athlete conversation going on, and you have two sides that people are just giving their sides and their opinions and their beliefs on. And sometimes I'm always watching just the way in which people are debating these issues, not necessarily the actual issues they're debating them. And I think the ones that end up getting so angry, so torn up, they then end up disengaging completely, and they just walk away. And you think, well, if you could approach this in a much more emotionally controlled way, with also the added idea that you need to accept where the other person's at, know that you may not be able to change them because this is something you cannot control. You just potentially are going to put your point across. And I think you end up doing yourself a better favor, both personally and for your cause, because you're trying to just say what you mean, say what you hope, and say what you experience, and then and whatever happens from then. And the person I'd spoken to, I said, well, if you're frustrated by this person, sort of write down all the reasons why it's frustrated you, what you'd hoped to come out of the conversation, and what you perhaps hoped for them, really. Like, is it essentially you just want them to click your fingers and them change their ideology straight away and the way they think? Is that reality? All of these things, and just literally getting that out of your head and onto a page can be really, really beneficial. So it's almost like a go-to guide of how to deal with some of these anger and frustration issues that you may be facing.
Yeah, and we're not always right all the time. So
100%.
I think sometimes, and you might think that you know everything about something, or you are totally on it. So if you have to have the humility to pause, stop, listen, and you might change your view a little bit, or you might come closer. Certainly, like, I get a lot of emails and conversations in the terraces from fans that would like to give me some advice or tell me what we should be doing. And a lot of the time, like, they're so passionate about it because it's their most important thing. But like, sometimes they've got to the angry stage so quickly, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a fence is broken, or it could be that the price of chips has gone up, or the left back isn't performing. But it's like it's so angry, and you have to soak that in. So that's like where the thick skin comes in. You have to soak it in, because you can't just I don't just shut someone down. I'll kind of listen, and maybe I will learn about where they're coming from and try to understand some of the underlying factors as well. So yeah.
Is there anything that you came into the role with, or even just with your vision, that you went in with a hope for, that you've now changed your opinion on? I'll give you an example. Like my 6 years ago, I trained as 7 years ago, I trained as a yoga teacher. When I came back, I went to Hawaii for a month and did it, and I came back and it was an incredible experience. And when I came back, I literally wanted to change the world in this way that I'd sort of learned. But what I soon came to realize was the world didn't work in that way, and you kind of get your hopes and dreams get squashed by reality of what actually is going on. Now, in this example, you've got a very ancient way of doing things built now in a modern society. So there's marketing, there's money to be exchanged, and it goes against a lot of the ethics of it. And I'm just curious as to whether there was something that with your hopes and dreams you came into almost like bright-eyed and hoping to do that with this big vision, and it's kind of changed, and maybe you've changed your approach with things and how you go about that.
Yeah, but too many things to even list, probably.
Right, yeah.
I think the things that I really noticed, one thing in particular that really took me by surprise, which is stupid because if you thought about it, then of course that would be the case, is that I came from a highly professional organization with highly educated colleagues, and coming into a football club, you deal with a lot of different types of people with lots of different backgrounds and lots of different educational backgrounds as well. And you also work with a lot of volunteers. And so you've got this huge, it's much more representative of society in a football club than if you're working in a highly professional, kind of somewhat sterile area, organization or company. And the other thing about a football club is that for everyone, it is the most important thing in their lives. So for our players, it's the most important thing. For our youth players, it's the most important thing. It's what they can't wait to leave school for. They can't wait to get to for their parents, it's the most important thing because they want their kids to be happy. For our fans, it is the most important. They're going through their daily lives and they can't wait for the football at the weekend. And then for our volunteers, this is what gives them value, what gives them meaning in life, is to be able to volunteer at the club throughout the week. And for the staff, so suddenly if you're running a business, even if you own Apple, like, people love your products, but it's not the most important thing in their lives, and they have loads of opinions about it. So in a football club, you're dealing with highly charged, very emotional people all of the time. And that I just hadn't thought about it. I hadn't expected it. And I think it just shows you really need good people management. And even if you're really good at people management, or you think you're good at people management, you're going to mess up a fair bit. And you have to figure out, because you've got all these emotions. And the other thing is, for someone like me, I'm a bit of a people pleaser. Like, you can't please everyone. It's just not possible. So having to learn through that has been a big learning curve for me. On the flip side, there's some things that I just did naturally, which football clubs didn't seem to do naturally, which I just introduced, and everyone was like, whoa, what's this all about? And those are things that were ingrained into me from my previous environment. So, we published our club strategy a couple of years ago, and then we published an analysis of how well we did against the strategy, which included where we failed and like how badly we failed and what we're going to do differently. And we're very open and transparent, and we share impact reports, and so all this kind of stuff that I think is actually quite normal in the big wide world, but football clubs don't do, are just things that naturally I've brought in as part of trying to build that trust, like saying, look, this is what we're trying to do. Yes, we failed in this area, but we did succeed in this area. And those are kind of key principles of transparency, and accountability is really key for me, and integrity, that I'm just being very honest and open with what it is that we're trying to do, so that to try to build that trust with all these very emotional people, if that makes sense.
What would be your advice to a club, whether it's in football or any sport, that wants to go against the grain, wants to be that standout, wants to be kind of the torchbearer in whatever passion they have, but is also afraid of the norms that have happened before it, and they're worried about the backlash that they might face, being those outsiders and the outlier in that case. So, what would be sort of your tips to someone who may be thinking and hoping to be that person in their club, but is maybe scared or afraid of the backlash that they might face?
Yeah, I think that the key thing is that you can instigate it, but you can't do it by yourself. So yes, you can bring together, identify your allies, especially if it's an ally, one that's a player and one that's a fan and one that's on the board. And if you can build those people that are all willing to put the hard work in and kind of build something, it can't be down to one person. It will never last if it's just one person, because at some point that person will burn out, break down, or just move to another club or another place. And so there has to be a you have to build foundations that are strong, and that needs more than one person. So I think that where I see football clubs needing to go, I do think that football clubs need to have a personality to thrive over the next 10 years. And I'm not sure that many clubs do have a personality, because as we go forward, location is going to be less important. People are going to start choosing their football clubs in the way that today we take it for granted that you grow up in a place and you naturally are going to be connected to that club. But I think as we kind of grow, develop, and we're a bit more purpose oriented, or we're a little bit more aware of value, things like a conversation about values I just wouldn't have had when I was 15. I would have probably trotted out the values that my teacher wanted to hear, those the trust and honesty or whatever. but I think, now what Forest Green Rovers stand for. They've got a personality. Yeah. Lewes FC, what we stand for. We've got a personality. I think others are going to have to figure out what their personality is, because I think also with this local to global kind of football sports ecosystem, I think that I'm going to be trying to find my fans in Hull or Huddersfield, not just within Sussex. So I'm going to have to try and find those people that believe in the club, our values and our personality, and like our personality. I think that's where we're going to go, and a few clubs might be ahead of the curve. I'm not sure whether we can reach right up to the top, because the money up there is just so out of whack with the rest of the world. But yeah, I think.
But especially when you're telling people about your values, you're telling people about things that aren't even related to a ball, right? They're not even related to the sport. They're things that people can connect with. They're 100% agree with that. I think there's going to be people that will identify with a team because of the way they do things. There's a team that I love on social media, and I really encourage people to go and look at them. They're called the Savannah Bananas. They're a baseball team in Savannah, and they bring fun to baseball. Yeah. And they dance when they're playing. They got all of it's built from their social media following. And you think I actually was like, I'm considering going to Savannah to go and watch a game. And then I looked, and it's like every game this season is sold out. Every game, right. Like merchandise is being sold around the world. Their following is like growing exponentially, and it's all built off their what looks like their main core value of being fun and making sport enjoyable, accessible. It's actually not competitive ability or performance. It's nothing to do with that. These guys are good. You can see they're good, but their characters, like there's all this personality that's coming out. I mean, Wrexham are doing a really good job in what they're doing. They've got a great platform to do it on. Yeah. But it's doing things outside of the game, and like you said, Forest Green, like it's all of these social conversations that are outside of the sport. Just before we finish up, what are sort of your hopes for the future? What are your sort of goals and ambitions at the moment, personally, professionally, for the club?
Oh, big question. For me personally, I just always want to have alignment with what I'm doing. I can't really imagine. I don't know. Like I think I'm very open to adventure as well and doing things differently. I mean, I've had this random career change already, and then I've spent 2 or 3 years living in different parts of Africa. I'm kind of open to anything, but it has to be aligned with my values. So I don't have personal 5-year goals, 10-year goals. They kind of freak me out a bit. But I think for the obviously I'm super committed to the club because of those values. I think for the club, we're in a difficult spot. I think it's a constant challenge being in a club environment where you are living hand to mouth. So you are trying to get the money to keep things going at the same level or higher. And the pressure that is on us at the moment with the increased money coming into women's football, but mainly from a club level, means that we can't always keep, even though we make more money than most clubs in our league, and we make more money than some WSL clubs, and we have really good attendances and and we make money at our game, even though we're doing all of that, we can't keep up with things like wage inflation. So I think we're on this, I think we are at a little bit of a juncture. I don't know how long we'll be here. One of them will be like we soar, because some investment will come in or partners will come in and they'll want to see us fly. And then there is this, and I'm speaking candidly, obviously, there is this fear that actually we could also contract because we can't keep up. And that's quite a scary position to be in, but it is the reality of when you're in an independent club that is not, that we're not beholden to anyone, but sometimes being beholden to somebody means that you get handouts. And if you don't have that, then we can be fiery, we can have our personality, but it's also interesting to know like where that can take us. So yeah, it's a bit of it's a difficult one.
Yeah, the women's game is exciting, and actually not just even in football. The women's game in my sport, cricket, it's been great fun. I've had clients in the women's IPL this year, and that you're talking women who have been playing cricket in front of literally like a few hundred people, now in front of 50,000 screaming fans in India, and being the precursor to the men's tournament, and them all. They actually, the brilliant thing they did as well, they gave them all access to, or they integrated all the teams to the same social medias, for example. So there wasn't like independent social media set up, which sounds small, but it actually is quite massive, because it just gave the fan base and everyone you saw in India, they loved their cricket, they aligned with the team regardless of gender. Like it was just brilliant. And I think I'm hoping that's sort of the way in which every sport's going to start going, and it's undoubtedly is, and there's going to be challenges along the way. Before we finish up, I always ask guests whether they have a book, a documentary, a film, or something that they've recommending to others at the moment that's inspired them, and that can be a range of that can be anything.
So I love reading, but I love reading fiction. But I think I have this phrase that I say to myself a fair bit to keep me going. I don't know, would that do? It's not a documentary or a film.
Absolutely love it.
So the phrase is, it's said by Audre Lorde, an American poet, author, activist. And she said, revolution is not a one-time event. And I just thought it was so powerful, because it's not, you can't just wear a t-shirt one day which has a slogan on the front. You've got to be building it. It's all those tiny actions, all those small things that you do behind the scenes when you're drafting a policy or you're drafting a procedure. That's revolution. It's not a one-time event. It's lots and lots of little things. So I think that keeps me going a lot of the time.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Look, we've covered loads. Is there anything that you would like to sort of closing remarks or get across before we finish off?
Get angry.
I love it. I really enjoyed that. I really like that. I'd really like this idea of using anger as a driver, and I think I'm guilty of seeing the UK as a very cynical place, and people just wanting to moan for the sake of moaning. But I think when people can realise there's a passion behind what it is they're angry and frustrated around, that's great. I think the next thing is to do something about it. Do something about it. Yeah. And I love that message that's come out of this. Look, for people who want to follow yourself, Lewes, where's the best place to send them? Shamelessly plug what you need to plug.
Yeah, well, so I'm on Twitter at Maggie Murphy, but with no U in the Murphy, because there's too many Americans who are called Maggie Murphy. You can probably find me. But Lewes FC is on, we've just started a TikTok channel. So apparently it's good. I'm not actually on TikTok, so I need to check it out. So we've just started that, but otherwise, Instagram and Twitter. We tend to have a men's handle and a women's handle, but in TikTok we're all the same. That's probably the best way. I'll
leave links for all of those in the show notes, and also congratulations on being nominated for the BBC top 30 women in sport.
Yeah, that was a big surprise. I think my mum will be very proud of me to make Women's Hour. Yeah, that was cool. There's some incredible people there as well. So, in fact, people listening to your podcast should check out all those women who are doing some amazing stuff. Yeah, I'll leave a link for where people can find that as well. Look, Maggie, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it, and it's been great to have you on. No, thank you. Thanks for having me.